A2IM Indie Week 2021, presented by Sound Exchange.
Hi, everybody. I'm Richard James Burgess, President and CEO of A2IM, and I'm here today with Josh Hurwitz, who's our lobbyist with the firm MVG in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk today about the various advocacy efforts that we've participated in over the past year or so. So, hi, Josh. Really good to see you again.
Hey, Rick.
Thank you for being here with us today. So, there's been a huge change this year, obviously, with the shift in administration, the change in administration. How have things in DC changed from your perspective with regard to the issues that we care about for labels and artists?
It's a great question, Richard. I guess you could have asked, how haven't they changed? And I would have been completely silent. It's been quite a year. As you know, this is kind of the second year in which I've been working with A2IM. It's been a great pleasure, and I feel like we're making a ton of progress. I didn't think that I'd be doing the second of my A2IM Indie Week panel discussion tours again in a corner of a bedroom in my house when the pandemic started. And just like every other industry, kind of the business of Washington has been fundamentally changed by the pandemic. So everything else that's gone on is layered on top of this kind of constant state of emergency that kind of has become the default setting here. Since January with the inauguration of President Biden, some things have changed, some things haven't. There's still incredible partisan disagreement on almost everything. And however much the president talks about bipartisanship, it's harder and harder to find it every day. And that's really sad. It's really sad, especially for industries such as ours that have historically found our issues to be bipartisan. We've found a place that people that disagree on almost anything can come together. Right? You can have incredibly conservative kind of property rights advocates come together with incredibly progressive free speech advocates in support of what artists do, which is express themselves through free speech and then have a reasonable expectation that they can make a living off of it through property rights. The other thing that, is really clear to me at this moment is that, surprise, surprise, Washington's broken. How many presidents now have run time and again on, I'm going to change Washington? It's because nobody likes the way that it works. But this crisis mode is there in a really strong way. And so we're now, almost 6 months in to the Biden administration, and we're still talking about very high level issues. We're talking about vaccine distribution, response to the economic havoc that the pandemic brought, and some of the international issues at play, like our competitive issues with China. Usually Washington's pretty good at walking and chewing gum at the same time, but they're not doing it here. And so where we are in terms of the stuff that we really care about is frankly not as far along as I'd like us to be, because we're still, as a city here in Washington, as a country, and as a government, bogged down on these high level issues.
Do you see any kind of prospect of that changing? I know certain congresspeople weren't talking to other congresspeople because of what happened on January 6th and the aftermath of that. Is that settling down at all?
It's settling down some, yeah. So, after the insurrection on January 6th and the kind of riotous activity at the Capitol, there were a lot of elected officials saying, well, we can't work with anybody that was, even close to encouraging or inciting or validating like an attack on their individual safety, let alone the institutions. think that's thawing a little bit, right? And it's thawing in some areas that are helpful to us. I mean, maybe just to like jump in, one of the biggest things that we've worked on in the last year is a tax provision, right? It would help with the production of independent music. It's called the HITS Act. It stands for Helping Independent Tracks Succeed Act, because everything here needs to have an acronym. It's like, a bunch of kids who grew up playing Boggle ended up, now grown up policymakers. And that bill has a Democrat and a Senate sponsor in both the House and the Senate. And in both instances, on the Republican side, it's people that were fairly vocal, either voting not to certify President Biden's election, or making public statements that threw shade on the legitimacy of the election. And that doesn't seem to be creating headwinds for this bill that I think is a pretty potentially landmark step in the right direction for us.
Yeah, I mean, we had 2 attempts at that already, both failed, and seemingly inexplicably, really. So we're not going to give up on this, as we don't give up on anything, really. But so what do you think the prospects are going forward?
I think they're really good. Yeah, so just to kind of take a step back, what the HITS Act would do is change tax law, right, from the current state. Current state is that almost every other industry, because of a combination of things, including the Trump tax cuts bill in 2017, are able to expense what is their equivalent of production costs in the year that they're incurred, rather than having to wait and spread it out over the life of the asset that that the money was spent producing. So for our industry, that's say like 3 to 5 years, something like that. It's a cash flow issue. It doesn't matter necessarily to the huge corporations who've got plenty of working capital and investments left and right. But for especially your smaller guys who essentially have to wait to recoup the money on today's record or album in order to make tomorrow's, in an environment where those release schedules have been thrown into disarray by the inability to tour, to promote a release with live performance, can make a huge difference. The other thing that is, it's a fairness issue, right? So our industry does the same thing that plenty of other industries do. Venture capitalists, movie studios, they front money on something to make it with no guarantee that the market is going to respond favorably to it. That's kind of the sort of thing that our economy should be encouraging, because it leads to job creation, economic activity. And we're kind of left out. So where we are is we've got great champions for it. We have a desire from the folks that write the tax laws in Congress to fold it in somewhere. But both out of practical reasons and kind of messaging, we don't want to try to get an up or down vote just on our thing that could be pilloried as a special interest. So we're essentially looking for something to hook it onto. And we think that the next big recovery bill, which will probably happen by the end of the federal fiscal year, which is October 1st, will be our ticket. So here's hoping. Richard, I know you've talked a bunch to your members about how this could really help them.
Yeah, and it applies to artists as well. So even if you're somebody who is buying in finished albums, then it's really helped the artists who are producing it. It helps everybody who is producing music, and it's got to be a good thing, especially, as you say, in the middle of a time when artists come to tour. So I really appreciate all your work on that, Josh, and I appreciate the fact that you just keep going back, and that's what we do. That's what we have to do. It's a little frustrating. I felt like this would be a slam dunk. But as you say, the partisanship is not helping at all. So there are a couple other big issues we have going on. I mean, we had those Dmca hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee. I spoke in those, and it was fairly contentious, as I recall. Do you have any comments about that process, the DMCA? I mean, that's obviously this is a really big issue for us because it suppresses prices, from royalties, as it were, for labels and artists.
Yeah. So before talking about the substance, just an observation on where we are as A2IM. In the past year, Richard, you testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was virtual because of COVID. We've plugged some influential and notable A2IM members into other proceedings, like Heather Johnson from 99 Lives, that participated in a big panel that the Copyright Office had on this thing called standard technical measures, which basically means, like, should there be a rule that every web platform should have to do certain things that make sense to protect content and to give rights holders tools to figure out what's happening on these platforms. I mean, this is the craziest thing about it all, right? Is that we know that our industry is completely beholden to these mega corporate business models, whether it's YouTube's or Spotify's or Apple's or the big radio broadcasters like iHeart. And yet there's very little information that's shared. And so that panel is about that. DMCA is this federal law that essentially says to internet platforms, you get a free pass on legal liability if you respond to notices and take stuff down when a rights holder sets it up on your platform when it shouldn't be because of licensing terms or piracy. If that doesn't work, right? If that doesn't work to have that sort of legal setup layered on top of a situation, you have literally some of the biggest companies in the history of the globe up against individual creators, right? And so what's been getting a lot of talk, there was a big report put out by the Copyright Office about this, a bunch of hearings, as you mentioned, and probably more to come. It's basically just, is that out of balance? The DMCA was put into place in the late 90s. These internet platforms were very different. And nobody really knew what the internet was going to become at that point, right? That's like, the AOL version of the internet. And should things be shifted a bit? So I think that there is a possibility of getting some wins. I think it's going to be a while. I think it's kind of a 3 to 5 year project. And what's changed more than anything isn't the need for a change to the law. It's just the willingness of policymakers and frankly, the general public to begin questioning kind of all of these bargains that we entered into, in some cases willingly, and in some cases completely inadvertently, with Google and Facebook and Amazon for like what the trade would be for the fun, useful thing they were providing. And that, especially with everything happening around election disinformation and fake news, quote unquote, has captured the kind of attention of policymakers. So we're going to try to ride that wave.
Yeah.
But Richard, tell me, I know another thing that we got done last year was the copyright small claims bill, which kind of speaks to the reality for your members. Like, does this, you and I have talked about this, but does this system of sending notices to Google and crossing your fingers that something good's going to happen work?
No, what we hear from our members is that it simply does not work. And we did a survey several years ago that said that 62% of our members had given up on that process, especially because of the whack-a-mole process where, the minute you get something taken down, it pops back up under another URL. And that's where the standard technical measures come in handy. And I know that obviously that's where Heather Johnson from 99 Lives spoke on that roundtable, where we're trying to get processes put in place that will actually be more workable, because the law itself is one thing, the protection is one thing, but the way the notice and takedown system works is a complete other thing. And do you think that is likely to make any progress, the standard technical measures?
Well, you have business to business kind of conversations on behalf of your members all the time. But my understanding is when you talk to the guys at Google, when you talk to the guys at Twitch, when you talk to the guys at Triller, they'll say, well, of course we don't want unlicensed illegal content on our services. You know, we value our partnerships with creators. I don't think that that rings true when there's nothing done up front to prevent the bad stuff from getting there in the first place, right?
Exactly.
You can say what you will about YouTube. There are a million problems with it. The scale of YouTube is so big that even if the percentage of illegal content is very low, it's still a boatload of illegal content. But you know, Content ID, at least as an attempt at problems with Content ID are, one, it's only for YouTube, so not all of Google's other many tentacles. Two, you have to be pretty darn big to have a meaningful role in the Content ID program. And three, and I think this goes to all these antitrust investigations that have been happening in Congress and the Department of Justice and some lawsuits, is that the reason that Google does that is because of the money-making opportunity it represents, not out of the goodness of their own hearts, right? And so recognizing that everything that's happening in these systems is about maintaining control, keeping the eyeballs, and finding new revenue streams is something that's crucially important. But I'm excited to see that, you know, whether it's directly our issues or some things that are related, like, you know, the way that Android phones work related to search, which is obviously, you know, a kind of self-promotional relationship, whether it's the way that the iTunes store works in terms of the cuts that they take, the way that some of the DSPs work. I know we're working in that space a little bit. I feel like there's some more attention than in the past. This is another thing that's changed in Washington. For a long time, the enforcers have just not done much. You can question why that is. I have my own theories, but the reality is that they haven't. The new administration said really clearly to the Federal Trade Commission, to the Department of Justice, I think that it's flowing to the Copyright Office as well. You all got to conduct meaningful investigations, bring prosecutions, find people, because if not, the big guys just continue to you know, benefit. And those investigations or those findings have to be meaningful. The reality is that like a meaningful fine for Facebook has lots and lots and lots and lots of zeros on it, or they, you know, put their hands down to the couch cushions, find some coins and pay it that way.
Yeah, it's cost of doing business. So, I mean, that's an interesting point. We've had many conversations with the DOJ and the FTC in the prior administration and in this administration as well. Obviously, we all think something needs to be done. Part of the problem is the interpretation of antitrust law has really shifted over, you know, the 100-some years that it's been in place. Do you see any prospects there, or do you think that this is just a lost cause?
So there's a real possibility of bipartisan work that's specific to the internet platforms. That's where the kind of coalescing has occurred. In terms of kind of a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren-esque reordering of antitrust law to make it a real meaningful consumer protection tool, I think that we still got a ways to go on that. But, you know, I'm heartened. I mean, I think that at a minimum, Richard, you've been involved in some of these conversations. When we talk to these federal policymakers, there's an interest in what we're raising. There's a recognition that things are out of balance and that is bad for consumers, for creators, for the basic idea of fairness, and for rewarding the sorts of things that our government espouses to be for, like hard work and creativity.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
that's a change. I mean, it's crazy to say so, but that's a change in and of itself. What happens out of it is still really, it's been slow to materialize. I mean, Richard, as you know, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, the head of the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division under the Biden administration. These are spots that haven't been filled yet. So as you can imagine, somebody that's temporary or acting in one of those positions isn't going to do something landmark. They're just keeping trains running. But hopefully those appointments will come through in the next, month or so, nominations, and we'll have people in by the end of the summer. And then I think it could really pick up.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, obviously we know, we have 2 years with a skinny margin in Congress, and then we don't know what's going to happen up to 2022. You have any thoughts about that? How that process is likely to go?
I mean, we'll see. The president's approval ratings are relatively high. The economy is obviously continuing to struggle in the wake of the pandemic. But what Democrats will tell you is that people are seeing what government has done for them with the pandemic, unemployment assistance, with the money going to states and localities to bolster the bits of government that people actually see on a daily basis, like most notably school systems. Democrats think that means that they can stem the tide. Republicans did, other than in the presidential election, Republicans did very well in the last election.
They did, yeah.
And I think the question is going to be, how large does Trump loom? The Democrats have kind of in a steady way made gains in every election where Donald Trump was not on the ballot since 2016, and have done worse than expected, including in 2020, though they won the White House when his name has been on the ballot. So what happens in 2022? Obviously, he is continuing to be active enough that he's going to be part of the narrative and probably part of the activity. And we'll see how that sorts out. I mean, I think it's going to continue to be slim majorities. And so that means compromise.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the concept of IP, property rights, really should appeal to both sides of the aisle, really, shouldn't it? I mean, Republicans are historically great supporters of property rights, and Democrats are historically supporters of fairness and labor rights and the right for workers to be paid. So, and both apply to IP. But it definitely doesn't seem like we did very well in the last administration. I'm interested, by the way, this, I thought it seemed like good progress, although we're not there yet, with this IP waiver that happened to vaccinations, which I personally think is a good thing. We need to solve this problem globally, the COVID problem globally. But at the same time, there was a danger of copyright, music copyrights getting ported there, all copyrights getting ported to their books and music and movies. That seems to be less of a risk right at this point. Is that your perception?
Yeah, so where that issue stands is the administration has essentially said that they're going to support the idea of waiving IP rights related to the pandemic. And so that means the vaccine, and it mostly means the patents. People who are smarter than I and understand the way these vaccines work, there are actually some software-related copyrights that go into making at least one of them. The bigger issue is the international marketplace, right? So America's not great regarding making lots of stuff anymore, right? We've lost our edge in manufacturing, so on and so forth. Where we continue to be the global leader is in IP, right? Whether it's film and television and music, or video games and software, it's where we have the ability to lead the global marketplace, and other countries know that, right? And so I think this issue with the IP waiver, the causes of concern are not related to whether, people in the developing world can have access to vaccines. I think everybody wants that. But whether it creates a situation where foreign countries feel like they need to do less to protect American IP because the American government essentially gave the nod to the World Trade Association, allowing these vaccine patents to, not be honored. So we've seen that in the past. What I worry about is, as you know, Richard, the big internet platforms, most notably Google, pay a ton of money to public interest groups who have grown huge international footprints to try to convince foreign countries not to protect US IP. We know that, for pretty much every IP industry, the growth areas are overseas consumers. You want to have access to them. We know that piracy is kind of, borderless. It doesn't matter where the server that's supporting a stream ripping site is. American consumers can still get to it. It's not like the old hard goods world where, the bootleg CD, needs to get into the United States somehow or needs to be made somewhere in the US for US consumers to have access to it. So hopefully this is an area where the Biden administration is strong. Biden historically is a huge IP and specifically copyright supporter. He served in the Senate for a long time, had his name on a bunch of things that helped us, played a role in the enactment of the Dmca itself in the late 90s. So hopefully the next time that we're going around on doing a free trade agreement, we're setting the bar pretty high on what foreign governments have to do. Probably also noting that, soon to come will be a US-UK free trade agreement, which has the possibility, since they, as you know probably better than I do, Richard, create a lot of very talented musicians and actors and film and music. Their interests are kind of aligned. Hopefully that can create an opportunity to raise the bar, so the next time we go and try to do a deal like we did with Mexico and Canada under the Trump administration, we get a good deal for US IP.
Yeah, we've been very active in these trade deals to stop the safe harbors getting exported to other countries that have more IP-friendly laws. Unfortunately, with Brexit, we just saw the British government kind of throw the music industry under a bus. Obviously, they got to fix a lot of problems very, very quickly, given that Brexit happened the way it did. So we can only hope that, by the way, of course, we're part of a worldwide independent network, WIN, and we're linked in with 35 other trade associations around the world, including AIM in England and the UK. So we do have many discussions about this and try to coordinate our activities to make sure that these trade deals don't wind up being disadvantageous for any of us now, any of our labels, especially because we live in a global marketplace. I think that there's one huge issue that we haven't talked about yet, probably the biggest copyright unfairness, I suppose, and that would be the terrestrial right for FM, AM, FM radio. We're part of the Music First Coalition, which includes everybody to do with recording rights, all entities to do with recording rights. How do you feel about that now? We feel like we've made more progress this year than we've made, certainly last year in several years.
Yeah, well, first, before talking about the policy, Richard, I really have to tip my cap, both for myself and on behalf of the other DC-based people that work on these issues. A2IM and its members continually step up to the plate in tough situations to speak out on a variety of issues, but I think specifically to this issue, this basic unfairness issue that recording artists and labels don't get paid for radio play, and that policy continues to be in place despite the fact that the broadcasters have historically justified it as being reasonable due to the promotion value that they present and the fact that people discover new artists and new music on the radio, which is laughable, right? It's laughable for anybody who is willing to confront the way that they themselves discover music, let alone, I have an 11-year-old son, and he doesn't understand when, one of our devices accidentally gets into radio mode and he hears the static. He's like, what is that? Right? Young people, it doesn't matter to them. It doesn't, not how people listen in the car anymore, so on and so forth. So, whether it's, the work that we've done in partnership with your members like Jorge Brea at Symphonic, or, a great panel that we organized at South by Southwest with Madeline Nelson this year with Pandora, talking about like the real way that music discovery happens and the real tools that artists and labels have to draw a comparison. I feel like we've really upped our game, and that frankly, some of our peer organizations are benefiting from that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think one of the big things that they always focus on is the importance of local radio. And we actually agree that local radio is important, but we do not agree that the lobby, like LUR for the Local Radio Freedom Act, and that has anything to do with local radio at all. I mean, you and I have talked immensely about, or so many times about the, the main studio rule and things like that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The radio industry and the broadcasting industry generally has not been immune from this kind of rapid deregulation that we've seen across the board. It's led to problems across the board. Just ask the environmental movement about that. For us, since the beginning of the Trump administration, radio has had some of the, frankly, few remaining restrictions that they have on them that require a radio station actually to be local have been rescinded. So the main studio rule, pretty basic idea. If you're saying that you're, classic rock radio, Rochester, New York, like you should be in Rochester, New York, like with a human being, not just a switcher box in a, cupboard somewhere. They did away with that. The Trump nominee-led SCC did away with that. They did away with what's called the Duplication Rule. We think we might actually be able to beat that one back because the National Association of Broadcasters kind of surprisingly flubbed a process issue. You'd think they'd know the process of the Federal Communications Commission well enough, given how much money they spend lobbying the agency. But what that rule basically said was we're going to put a cap on how much content can be straight up duplicated by a commonly owned station that's in the same metro area, in the same market. Why was that in place historically? Because diversity of views is good. It's especially good, and you would think would resonate today with all the discussions around, historically marginalized communities, needing a voice, needing avenues to express themselves. But in August of last year, kind of towards the end of things, that rule was done away with. We're fighting things not just because they're important and because they disadvantage the true local radio that indie labels and artists can actually partner with on local promotion, but because it kind of lays bare the argument that the big national association puts forth on behalf of, frankly, 2 or 3 companies that they actually care about local, because they wouldn't be doing the stuff that they did if they actually cared about it.
Yeah, and this really hurts independent labels, because I know from my own experience owning labels and being a manager, I mean, local radio stations can be your best ally. I mean, certainly back in the day when we had CDs to sell, or even downloads to sell, there may have been a promotional value, especially when you were starting a band out. You could go to your local station, you had a relationship with them, and you could get some early airplay even at 3 a.m. or whatever. But now, you're talking, I mean, you would be talking to a black box if you went into your local radio station, because that's about all that's there. And then if you've got the duplication rule as well, I mean, that's even worse, right? You don't even know where the stations are. It's not in your town anyway. You can't build that relationship. And so you're down to this kind of bottleneck of having to go to this mega conglomerate to try to get any action. And good luck with that, really.
And Richard, I mean, I know I'm repeatedly tooting your horn, but you're You've been a great partner. This also relates to the live performance issue. I mean, we've done a lot of work with NEVA, the New Independent Venue Association, related to the same thing. They have huge issues of kind of market consolidation and conglomerate ownership, principally related to Live Nation in their space. So we found common cause around this idea that the kind of symbiosis that historically existed between, a label and a venue and a broadcaster who lived in the same community, frankly, in a lot of cases, music fans together, supporting local talent together, just doesn't exist anymore. The venues were able to get some really meaningful help in some of these relief packages. I think we're really happy to see that. And I know that the venues are really thankful for our support on that.
Yeah, I mean, NEVA, obviously we stand very closely behind NEVA. We really appreciate what they've done. What we don't want to see is a situation where the pandemic comes to an end and bands go out on tour and they can only deal with massive networks of venues that are owned by a couple of owners. That doesn't work very well, especially when you're starting out, and you wind up getting crushed again because you simply cannot negotiate with those companies. I wanted to jump to the Register of Copyrights, Shira Perlmutter. I know we have a new registrar, and you know her, right? And we've had conversation with. I've had a conversation with her. I know you have too. Any thoughts about what's likely to happen at the Copyright Office, or anything that might be beneficial to independent labels?
Yeah, so I mean, things at the Copyright Office move slowly. It's kind of by design. Register Perlmutter is as strong of a copyright ally as I've ever seen. She has a long history leading work on copyright at the Patent and Trademark Office, before that in the legal department at Time Warner Inc., the company that I used to work for. She is with us. There's no doubt about it. She reaffirmed the U.S. government's position along with the Patent and Trademark Office director last year after her appointment related to the terrestrial performance rights issue. They're doing a lot of really interesting stuff with the Copyright Office. And I think by and large, their primary focus is on making the copyright system work better for small creators, make the system work better, reducing the administrative burden. So, they're standing up this new copyright small claims tribunal system that will enable folks that don't either have the time or the money or the inclination to, hire a law firm and go after lengthy litigation to seek to recover smaller amounts of money, but still, recover damages when the stuff is stolen. Another thing they've worked a bunch on is trying to improve the technology. Their registration and recordation system, frankly, is a mess. It makes things really hard. It plays into the hands of some of the copyright foes who say, well, gosh, we'd be more than happy to pay for something, but we just couldn't find the right person to pay for it. We know that that's ridiculous. And any update that can be done to the IT system, I think, is going to be helpful. She's totally supportive of that. And then the other thing that I think is most important is that, the Copyright Office stands in the shoes of the primary intellectual property advisor to Congress. As you know, copyright law, IP law, super complex stuff, not necessarily the sort of issues that, wins you an election. Very few elected officials wake up in the morning thinking about copyright. And so having somebody who sees the world that we do, answering the technical questions that get sent over to the Copyright Office on a weekly, if not daily basis, is going to be a huge help to us in terms of our long game, right? So I'm confident that we're not going to have a situation where we're scratching our heads saying, gosh, the Copyright Office just set us back with the explanation they provided to Chairman such and such, as long as she's in that spot.
Right. I appreciate that very much. I mean, I want to say, Yeah, and obviously the Copyright Office is absolutely key to us, and sometimes it hasn't been as favorable to our cause as we would have liked. But I do definitely feel very optimistic about it.
We've upped our game there, right, Richard? I mean, I don't know the exact number, but either us individually or in partnership with like-minded organizations, I think well over a dozen public comments filed at the Copyright Office in the last year, staking out the position, and in some cases the nuance that, that indie labels and the, sorts of creators that we represent have on these issues, such that, our voice is heard. Whether it's the implementation of this copyright small claim system or the implementation of the Music Modernization Act, which is primarily on the songwriter side, but could impact us if implemented in the wrong way, implemented in a way that leads DSPs to disadvantage us in the future. We're there in all those fights, which I think is great.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, I want to finish up by thanking you, Josh, for everything you do. I mean, you're not just somebody who understands the technical issues, you're incredibly creative, and you pivot on a dime, which we have to do all the time. And nothing ever stays the same, does it? And you have to change your tack all the time because you run into a brick wall. And but you're also pretty guerrilla as well, which is kind of something I think every independent understands. You have to get out there and hide behind trees and take shots when you can. You can't, we don't have the firepower to just stand on the line and shoot at the other side. We have to actually be very creative, and you've been unbelievably creative. And I think, for instance, your approach with all the new freshman Congress people has been amazing. Really sort of got in there and started making those connections. So before they get corrupted by the system, as it were, before they buy into the sort of received wisdom, that's been incredibly valuable. So thank you for everything you do for our members. It's really, really greatly appreciated.
Yeah, well, I mean, I got to say, Richard, thanks for the partnership, for you and your members. At the end of the day, there's a whole community of advocates here in Washington, many of whom for, years, if not decades, have espoused that they, speak for music. And having a voice for A2IM in that group, not only saying what we believe to policymakers, but also holding some of our allies and frenemies to account, to make sure that they're not going too far out on a limb, that they aren't talking about small creators and the interests of them when they actually have nothing to do with those guys at all. I think has really helped, not just us, but I think it's helped overall music advocates. And I think you see that, right? And we have the Recording Academy, we have the RIAA, we have the publishers, we have Sound Exchange coming to us, looking for opportunities to partner. And I think that and some of the DSPs as well, having more open conversations with us than they've had with advocates from the content community, the creation community in a long time. I think that puts us in a really great spot. What exactly it leads to, that's the tough part about Washington. You never know exactly, but I know for sure that we are better connected. We have more kind of tripwires up for things that could happen without us knowing that now will not. And we're better positioned, and we're getting direct outreach. Kind of a year after checkup on where we are. The lead congressional offices know where we sit and reach out to us at the same time as the majors, at the same time as the DSPs. And I think that is a huge step forward.
I think that's the biggest win of all. Things don't tend to move forward without us being consulted at this point. And that wasn't true 4 or 5 years ago. So thank you very much for all the work you've done. I truly, truly appreciate it. And thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you. And next Indie Week, I want to be there in person because
so do I.
It isn't exactly the same. And I'm running out of the various corners in my house, so y'all don't see the same every time.
Thank you again. It's great to see you again.
Thanks so much for everything.
Bye-bye.